Hello, everyone. This is Mateusz from ProductTank Wroclaw. Welcome to the Product Tank today. This is the number 10 of Product Tanks in Wrocław that we've held so far. Hope many to come in the future. And I'm very, very glad that you're here with us today. Due to bad weather and summer holiday season already starting, you still want to learn something new. And I hope you will learn something new today. Today we have three great presentations, but let me share just a few words about the Product Tank initiative. If you haven't heard it so far, it started 10 years ago with a couple of guys meeting over a beer, talking about what's up in life and in their work, of course. They've been talking about products for many years. They've been talking with a group of friends, but in just a couple of years, it so happened that from just a couple of guys, it became a whole initiative called Product Tank. Today, after 10 years, we have over 200,000 people all over the world talking about what's up very, very often. And with that, we have came to the conclusion that it makes sense not only to organize events such like this one to get people together, but also it makes sense to share the knowledge in other forms. We've been able, besides the events, to organize the content that is updated every week in form of blogs, videos, or in forms of featured jobs, for example, if you're interested. But also, we've been able to most recently open up a proposition for people that want to learn even more or get a chance to talk to the best leaders in products or people working on products all over the world by means of introducing the membership program. You can learn many, many more. You can participate, for example, in Ask Me Anything sessions with the best product people from Google, Amazon, and more. Or if you're a product leader, you can join and connect with other product leaders all over the world. Product Tank is also, and foremost, is your community. It's not only globally, but foremost, it's very locally. We are present in Poland in 5 cities so far. Besides Wrocław, we have Kraków, Warsaw, 3 cities, and Poznań. So make sure that you look frequently in our Facebook page to check more events in other cities. You can get involved by speaking on one of the local events, or by writing any blog posts, or by hosting an event if you're interested. Coming to today we will be talking about best practices in building products. As said, we have 3 presentations, but we're going to start with Stanisław, who is a product manager in Lean Enterprise Institute, Poland. Stanisław, besides being a product manager, is a husband and father of 4. And when he came to me, I actually was thinking, man, you have some guts to make sure to take care about your family of 4, but also not only think about products, but as well willing to share some of your thought with other people. Today, Stanisław will talk about the why of product management best practices. So with that, let me introduce Stanisław.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Stanisław.
Okay. We can see your presentation now, so you can start. The floor is yours.
All right. I'm glad to be able to speak to you here. It's an honor to be here at Product Tank Wrocław. I would like to show you my thoughts on the why of product management best practices. That's the topic of this talk. But first, let me introduce myself. Thanks, Mateusz, for this intro. But just to developing a little bit more about me. Apart from the roles that Mateusz mentioned, I also have the role of a team leader. So do both jobs at the same time, being a product manager and a team leader. I've also recently started a blog, productizing.com, where I share my experiences in developing, managing products, and the experiences of being a father, because I see a lot of synergies there in these 2 roles. I've postgraduated in psychology and management, and I also learned the topic of lean product development from the likes of Hugh McManus from MIT and Dorward Sobek. What am I going to talk today about? So the agenda of this presentation. I already introduced myself briefly, but I would like to share 3 best practices: learning fast practice, planning work, and regular brief meetings. And I will try to explain why do these work and under what circumstances. Then I'll wrap up the talk, and there will be some time for Q&A. Okay. So in the title, I wrote about product management best practices. However, at the beginning, I will be honest with you. I will maybe disappoint some of you. I fully agree with Donald Reinertsen, a product development guru, who in his book Managing the Design Factory said that the idea of best practices is a seductive but dangerous trap. So I will try to highlight some of these will be practices, so that by adding your context, the context of your product, of your organization, you should be able to assess whether this practice will work for you and why, or maybe not, and for which challenges, for those challenges that you are tackling, whether it will work or not. And the second thing I need to clarify at the beginning is that I will use some old data. I deleted the data that was older than me, but still it will be old. Okay, some of it at least. So having this clarified at the beginning, let me start with the first practice I would like to talk about is learning fast. Also known, actually in some recent Mind the Product blog posts, known as failing fast. The point here is to gain knowledge, get an answer to a question, validate a hypothesis with the least possible use of resources. That's how I understand. It seems quite straightforward, really. Nobody wants to waste resources, whether it is time, money, effort, or anything else. However, when I first saw the next few graphs, I got really enlightened. They helped me to understand why learning fast in the early stages of designing a product or a feature might be really beneficial. Okay. So for some of you, it might be basics, but still, I think it's worth remembering about it. So in a typical product or feature development process, we commit the majority of costs in the concept development phase, right, at the very beginning. Therefore, the percentage of management leverage drops down in this phase, in the concept development phase. These costs committed at the very beginning of the product development phase in hardware projects, it could be technology selected, the raw materials that we use, subsystems, etc. In software, it could be also the technology that we will use or the architecture. On the other hand, in a typical development process, this level of knowledge in this conceptual phase is relatively low, right? So we cannot make decisions based on this knowledge, or the decisions that we will make have a low chance of being good decisions in comparison to this knowledge in the next phases of this process. I've worked on 4 projects that were planned like this typical way. They were large ones. They were 15+ organizations. They were defined by 100 long pages documents. People from different countries working together. And the projects were planned, 4 years. Some of the actions were planned over 4 years in advance. These were research projects, sophisticated ones, but really none of those projects has ever fully achieved their goals. And my belief, it's only my belief, I don't have any, working inside of those projects. My belief is that one of the reasons for the fact that the project didn't achieve the goals, was this detailed upfront planning of those activities that were meant to start, in 4 years' time. How can you know what will you be doing in 4 years' time? How can you plan it with such a long distance? So, yeah. On the contrary, I would like to share with you the history, which I'm sure you've heard of, about the Wright brothers, how those guys outpaced their competition. According to Durward Sobek, Samuel Langley has spent 70 times more than the Wright brothers on his inventions. Clement Adler, 120 times more. Hiram Maxim, 200 times more than the Wright brothers, 200 times more money. A German guy, Otto Lilienthal, he had 2,000 test flights. All of those people were trying to reach to be the first ones to have the first manned flight, right, back in the end of the 19th and beginning of 20th century. However, most of us, I'm sure, don't know about those names except the Wright brothers, because they were the first one who succeeded in this challenge. How did they succeed? Well, they first closed the knowledge gap. So they heavily invested their time, their effort in gaining knowledge in the very first parts of the development process of the first airplane, manned airplane. They had some knowledge gaps like the wing design gap, propulsion gap, some commonly accessible data was wrong, so they had to figure it out themselves. So after they closed the knowledge gaps, they built a prototype, and actually, it flew with none or with very slight design changes. So really a remarkable thing to do, especially in comparison to their competitors. So coming back to the knowledge curve, what we try to achieve with the learning fast and early practice and all the tools supporting it, like rapid prototyping, lean startup framework, etc., is to change the shape of these curves so that we keep more of the management leverage percentage and limit the costs that we commit in the concept development phase. So keep these costs to minimum until we gather enough knowledge to take data-driven, knowledge-based decisions. It's all about that, right? The first area in concept development. What happened with in those projects, research projects that I was taking part in? Well, we obviously spent a lot of our time to prepare the plan. We invested heavily in this, preparing 100-page long documents that was a detailed plan of what we were planning to do. However, we knew too little at this time about the results of our first tasks, about what will come out after first year of work, to be able to plan accurately the second, third, and fourth year tasks. So there is one more thing apart from that as well that caused this long-term detailed plan to fail. When you plan based on the data that you have today, you need to remember that this data becomes obsolete. The information that you have is rotting. A research by Gene Cato, a student at MIT, revealed that in the embedded software projects that he was studying, if information was kept in inventory for 1 month, the engineers that used this information in their work needed to work extra 6% on average to make up for the loss of this information. So you can imagine the consequences in our 4-year-long project. When we planned, when we were planning, we planned 48 months in advance, more or less. So from setting the plan to starting the last tasks, this would mean we lost 95% of information, or the other way around, the information in the plan would require 95% of rework, of extra engineering work. So it's really no point in planning in such a long distance so precisely. How do I learn fast and early? Well, I try to apply continuous discovery, this concept promoted by Teresa Torres recently. I try to use the UserBit app, where I write down all the notes that where I talk with the users. I tag them, and I learn new things. This way, I learn new things about the product. This helps me prioritize my backlog. having each week or even more often discussions with customers, with different types of them, etc. Also embracing the change over following a plan. This Agile manifestos, one of the Agile manifestos points, is also a key here. Plan fast and early. And generally planning incrementally, not planning like 2 years in advance, but planning, I know, quarter, 2 quarters, and then incrementally adding up on that plan. So that's the first practice that I wanted to talk to. The second one is a bit more general, and it can be applied not only to our product management's work, but also other work planning. I hope you plan your work to some degree. I do it in one place, in the Outlook calendar. I always wonder how much of my calendar should be booked, how many free time slots I should keep for the next week or for the next day. And the answer I found is, well, it depends, of course. That's my favorite answer. Often hear it from the developers. What does it depend on, right? So how much I should be utilized, or my calendar should be booked? Well, this depends on the SLA that we want to keep with our stakeholders, with all the people we interact with. So let's call it lead time. How long it will take when somebody comes in with a task until this task waits in a queue, we take care of it and we handle it over to that person. So that's the lead time for incoming tasks. It also depends on the average activity time, how long on average it takes us to do activity. But it also depends on two statistical things here. It's the coefficient of variation of activity arrival rate and the coefficient of variation of activity processing time. I don't want to go into details here. I will show you how it works. The whole equation for the lead time is a little bit complicated, but what should be important for us is the shape of the graph, how the graph, those relations look like. So the first observation, how does the lead time, activity time, the ratio of lead time and activity time, how it depends from the utilization in cases of different values of the coefficient of variation. Well, first of all, it's a nonlinear equation, right? As you can see here. But what's a bad thing about it? It's that when we work in an environment where we want to learn fast, like the previous practice, where our supervisors and often we ourselves also want to maximize the value that we deliver by maximizing our utilization. And when the environment is not stable environment, a changing one, so the coefficient of variation is, let's say, growing or is higher. Well, we cannot have all three of these, right? We need to have a trade-off somewhere. We cannot. We need to trade off somewhere. How to reach a trade-off here? Well, we can reduce our utilization rate. We can say, okay, we will do our tasks in a longer lead time. But what I found the most relevant for me is first to focus on stabilizing, on reducing the variability. How can we do it? I'm sorry for this issue with the sound. We had a check before, but I hope it will be working better. How can we reduce the variability? I reduce the variability of arrival rate with the use of sprint planning. Yeah, sprint planning. Plan the sprint plan the tasks for the next sprint. Put them in this whole sprint as a container. And no task can get to developers if it was not planned during the planning. So this sorts things out here. On the other hand, no one else apart from the product owner can prioritize the backlog. And we can reduce the processing. We can reduce the processing time by applying definition of ready, so the developers know what to expect before they start working. I also reduce the processing activity time of meetings by simple thing like using agendas and checklists for the meetings. I also in our team we also use some templates for example for bugs and usability suggestions. It helps both the person who fills in a bug or a usability suggestion because he knows what to fill in, and the developer because he knows what to expect. He has this information organized in an expected way. There are also some more ways to reduce variability. I'm sure you can also think of some as well. But utilization is not all. If you are very, very busy, you still may be inefficient, right? You may have too many projects, and the switching costs may be consuming your time. The graph shows an exemplary relation between the number of simultaneous tasks and worker efficiency. In this case, the highest worker efficiency is at around 2.5 tasks, which means this person should have around 2 projects, and the rest he can fill in with some idle time or with idle time with a side project or maybe some time for development, etc. In order to increase the number of tasks at which you reach your highest efficiency, you need to decrease the costs of switching between the tasks. How you can do it? Well, I've been working at the top of the different projects or tasks that I was working on. I counted like up to 9 different areas that I was responsible for, and where I was actively doing some tasks. This was really bad. This was really a bad time. I wouldn't like to come back to it. Wouldn't like to have such a situation again. And as far as I know, some other product managers, this is often the case, having a lot of different topics that we focus on. So what I did when I had this big list, I tried to standardize some documents and spreadsheets in order to decrease the costs of switching. Yeah, so I could do those things, but it would cost me less to start doing them and to finish doing them and switching to some other tasks. But I also had to delegate some work, which I really recommend you if you have some possibilities to do that. Just letting go of some things and asking other people to do it. Okay, and finally, the last of the practices that I would like to talk about are the regular brief meetings called daily, stand-up meetings, etc. These meetings help to check our progress and plan our daily work and quickly identify the issues. These meetings are also, however, a great tool just in pushing the work forward, in completing the tasks. If somebody declares publicly with no compulsion that he will do a certain task today, in the next 24 hours, the odds that we'll complete it are much higher than without such a meeting, if you would just send a to-do list to people, etc. Each of us feels uncomfortable when what he says is not what he does. So the odds, so that's why it works like that. And the odds of completing a task rise even more when one knows that he will have to tell about the progress that he has made, right, on the next day, during the next daily. So each of us feels even more uncomfortable when what he says is not what he does, and when he has to tell about it in a group of people, right? So in order to minimize this discomfort, he will do as much as possible to finish the task he planned to finish. These meetings also help to mitigate the risk. There is in psychology, there is also a phenomenon called social loafing, or the Ringelmann effect. I won't go into details here because we're running out of time, but The daily meetings also help to mitigate this risk of social loafing. So wrapping things up, we've talked about 3 practices. First one, why learning fast works, along with the learning curves. If you spend too little of your time, money in the first phases of development, you will gain too little knowledge and will not make informed decisions. On the other hand, if you will gather information too early, part of it may rot and become outdated. So the key takeaway here is to plan, but not far into the future, or not so in details. Then we talked about planning our and other people's work and the number of tasks to work on simultaneously. And the key takeaway here is to know that the lead time of an incoming task depends on the utilization, average activity time, and the coefficients of variability. If we want to keep a certain lead time and high utilization, we need to reduce the processing time and especially the arrival time variabilities. We need to remember that high utilization is not equal to high efficiency due to switching costs when multitasking. And lastly, we talked about daily meetings and their psychological aspect. And these meetings, when everyone is meant to tell what they completed and what are their plans for the next 24 hours, help you push the work forward. I hope you'll take something for yourself from this presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Staszek. This was very helpful. Thank you very much. Again, a reminder to everyone on listening to us, if you have any questions, post them in the comment sections. I don't see any questions so far for Staszek, but please bear in mind that we'll still have a couple of minutes time at the end of the whole event to answer your questions. So if you have anything in the meantime, still you can ask them, and we'll come back to that later on. Staszek, maybe one question from my side. Is there any recommendation that you would give us on minimizing the time it takes to switch between the tasks in forms of maybe templates, documents, anything that comes to your mind? Yeah.
Well, I have in terms of templates, I like what I did. I really benefit from one of the templates that I've made. I also engage in sales talks with people, and it is not a thing I did before, so it was a new thing for me. So in the team, we prepared some templates, where I have a script of such a talk, and plus a package of documents that I show to the customer, some videos, some presentation, etc. And thanks to that, when I know that I have a call with a customer, I need to finish other tasks 10 minutes before, and I can start the presentation straight away. This really helps me a lot, and I really encourage you. I see Damian also wrote here that these templates and this stuff helps me a lot.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And
Thanks.
I think that's a wrap. Yeah. So now going to the next session of the day, let me introduce to you Damian. Damian is a product owner in Nokia. I've seen Damian actually at work. He's a very goal-oriented and detail-focused person, but he is as well a very thoughtful person. He has over 10 years experience in product, working in technical roles and in management roles as well, and architect roles. And today, Damian will share his experience on the most recent thing that he's been working on, which is productization of an open source. Damian, I'm opening up your slides now. You can start the presentation mode, and we can see it. So,
all right. So, hello everyone. Welcome. My name is Damian Nowak. As Mateusz invited me, we already know each other for some time, and I'm here in this business for like 12, 13 years probably. I'm in this IT business. Since like 2018, beginning of 2018, I've started my journey with open source, and also I would like to tell you something about productizing open source, and maybe giving you some ideas on open source based products that you haven't thought of before, right? So without any agenda, you might be probably aware that open source comes with some myths and facts. So usually when you start talking about open source, the first thing that comes to your mind as a product manager or a business person would be open source is free. Cool. Then, okay, you start to talk with people and it comes out that open source doesn't come with any support. And probably open source is insecure. And finally, the thing that you might learn as well is that open source, is a hobby of some techno freaks, California guys sitting around, having nothing to do and playing with software. So let's have a look at this. Let's think about those myths. Actually, they are all myths, and I will give you some ideas how it looks like in reality. So let's start from open source is free. Well, not really. I mean, it's free unless you want to use it in production, right? So if you want to use an open source product in production, it comes out that you need to have support capabilities, you need to have people that are able to fix issues, you need to have people that are able to change stuff, stabilize, and so on, right? So when you look at open source as from like amateur perspective, you want to try something new, then it's probably free. But if you try to use it in production, when you start being responsible for what the software means, then it's certainly not free, right? And for many companies, open source is not, I mean, the fact that they develop something, it's not to make it free of charge, it is to make it more, to let the community, to let the world know that they are doing something, right? So open source is free, a myth, right? Open source is a techno freaks hobby, right? So we have a bunch of those guys that have some good ideas, and as a hobby, they are developing something. Well, not really. Again, not really. So as you can see on those slides, on the left-hand side, I copied a slide of the organizations contributing to open source ONAP platform that we are dealing with as well. And as you can see, the first 5 are rather big companies, right? AT&T, Samsung, Orange, Ericsson, Nokia. These are pretty big, mostly telecommunications company, because that specific system is used in telecommunications. But on the right-hand side, I used as well Kubernetes. You probably know Kubernetes if you're coming from the IT space, right? And you can see as well pretty big companies, Google, Red Hat, Huawei, ZTE, Microsoft, and so on, right? So if you look at the open source technology, if you look at recognized open source products or open source platforms or open source software, it's not really techno freaks. It's not really hobby, unless you try to call Google a hobby, right? And here I gave as well some examples. Maybe a little bit of description why these, I call them fat cats, why those fat cats contribute, right? So first of all, it is the open source contribution, at least in the telco space, it is a little bit like differentiator for challengers, right? So people dealing with proprietary software, and now some guys come with something new, something fresh, something different, right? So they provide stuff in open source to differentiate from other companies, right? Sometimes companies are building as well some kind of ecosystems where their products can be used, right? So their products might be either services or maybe like modules that can be integrated with something, right? And you need to build an ecosystem to learn people how these things work, right? And the third category that I will look at it here is like a platform for co-creation projects, right? And that is specifically interesting in the telco space, because we see more and more that we have like telecommunications software or hardware vendors. They have some expertise, they have some ideas, but sometimes they are missing the know-how on what the customers are doing, what the subscribers of those services, what they are doing, what they need and what they want, right? So open source becomes in certain areas as well a platform for cooperation and a platform for co-creation, right? So it allows us to do something together without actually looking at our own hands, right? And I gave a couple of examples of those bigger companies that contribute open source. And you can be, it can be a little bit fuzzy where you see Netflix. Believe me, Netflix is as well doing quite a lot on open source, right? Okay, so the next thing, open source doesn't come with support. Going back to these slides that we have already seen, that open source doesn't really come with support. It is usually those open source software, recognized open source software systems, they are usually supported by bigger companies, by Google's, Microsoft's, AT&T's, Ericsson, Nokia's, Huawei's, and so on, right? So there is usually a bigger contributor to the open software system that is able to provide support for it. And there are even companies that are specialized on providing support for open source, like Mirantis. Mirantis is providing this kind of support mainly for OpenStack systems and for Kubernetes platforms these days, right? Which are completely open source systems, right? So it's not really that it doesn't come with support. And I think it's the last one. Open source is insecure. Well, that is as well a myth. So to be honest, there is quite a lot of open source certification in place. There are specific badges, right? So open source software communities, they might get a badge on their open source product, and they have to fulfill some requirements, including security certification. And many open source platforms follow as well some industry security scans, right? That allow them to prove that they are more or less secure in certain areas, right? Now, the interesting thing is that there are companies like Red Hat who claim that open source is more secure than a proprietary software. And the reason for that, or the justification that they give, is that being an open source code, everyone is able to go and assess the technology, the quality, the methods, algorithms, crypto technology, and so on, which is there, right? So you can check that for yourself. And it's not that you have a packaged software product where you have to trust the vendor that he did it right. You can check it yourself, right? So open source insecure as well being a myth, right? So with this introduction on the open source stuff that you might not know or stuff that you might have heard only, I would like to show you what are the different options, what we can do with an existing open source software to build products based on it. And it's usually not, a distribution of the open source platform. We can as well do many more things, like we can create our own software enabler platform. We can create an ecosystem around that platform. We can provide a number of services around open source. And finally, we can offer that open source as a service. So I will show you a couple of these ideas, and I will give you some examples if I know them. For majority, I know where someone is providing a product based on open source. So we start with open source distro product, right? So essentially what we do is that we take an open source software, we introduce some modifications, we introduce some, or we execute some stability, security, and so on tests, right? And then we try to package it as a commercial product and sell it as a commercial product, right? So the very basic example from my universe, telco universe, is OpenStack, right? And Red Hat OpenStack platform. So Red Hat OpenStack platform is exactly a commercial product based on open source OpenStack software that we have, right? Then the next one is an own software enabler component, right? So what does it mean? We have an open source product. We have an open source system, and we use that open source system as a building block of our larger product that has a larger scope, right? So to give you an idea, probably MariaDB is one of the most prominent examples, right? Where you use the MariaDB installation in order to provide a database system for your software system that does something, an image gallery or whatever you're building on top of this, on top of that open source software component, right? So second way how you can use open source in your product. Oh, excuse me. Then the third way is when we create an ecosystem platform based on open source, right? So what does it mean? We have an open source software that is providing a platform capability for so it's usually a solution, right? And on top of that open source software or platform, we create our own, we add our own applications, or we create as well services, right? In our case, we have those purple boxes on software, like 3 components running on top of that platform. Plus, we have some partner software, and we have own customer software, right? So we use open source software to build an ecosystem platform. We will provide our applications, and we will probably resell applications coming from others, or maybe allow them to our ecosystem, right? That can bring some additional upsell capabilities, right? And probably the last one that I have here is the open source as a service. So what does it mean? We look at the open source system and we try to provide that open source system in a software as a service model. So actually we give the access to the users to that open source software system, right? And we let them do what they like to do in there, right? But those, like, let's call them customers, right? Those customers that we have, they do not actually need to maintain that software. They do not need to update this software. They do not need to do anything in there, and they are getting some service with some SLA, right? So as you can see, it's not only this first example that I shown, right? So that we take this open source software and we try to build a product out of it by repackaging it, right? Putting it on our supply chain, right? But there are as well other ideas, right? Using it as a component, using it as an ecosystem platform that we build on top of it, or using that open source software in this as a in software as a service way, right? So the example here, a pretty good example, I think, is actually Kubernetes. So if you look at the examples, or if you look at the services coming from the main cloud vendors like Microsoft with Azure or Amazon with AWS and so on, most of them, they provide their own Kubernetes as a service solutions that you can use, like AKS, EKS, and so on, right? So a couple of things. Let me have a look at the clock. Not that bad as far as I see. So why a customer shall be interested to consider such a product based on open source, right? So for the open source distro, usually the thing is that second bullet, so it is a de facto standard, right? So there are many business areas where standards do not exist, or maybe they have high level approach to these standardizations, and a product comes in which builds like a kind of de facto standard. Look at the accounting systems, right? And think of SAP, a de facto standard in there, right? Almost everyone, or maybe everyone, is using that, right? In case of PCs, like commercial PCs, right? Maybe Windows is such an open start, is such a de facto standard, right? Because it's so popular. So okay, so that's why our customers could be interested, right? Now, going to the on software enabler component, so this MariaDB, right? Why should a customer be interested to buy such a product? Well, most probably because of the fact that such software systems, they usually come with a number of built-in integrations with other open source systems, right? So you can use MariaDB, and suddenly it comes out that you have a number of different extensions that you can use for reporting, that you can use for changes, for updates, management, and stuff like that, right? And something like this you get, let's call it, for free, having in mind our first slide that I have shown, right? Then going to the open source ecosystem platform, right? Here the situation is pretty similar. First of all, the fact that we have an open source platform where different companies can integrate their components, right? And integrate with a running software, not with a specification, right? It allows, or it builds up, or it enables, right, an access to a wide range of applications, right? So it doesn't mean that we are cooperating with a company and we can access only their applications. Not really. We can access as well other applications, because everyone is able to integrate with that open source platform, right? And finally, why should someone be interested to buy open source as a service? Well, most probably, as you probably learned, it's not that easy to stabilize an open source software, and it's not that easy to have a team that is able to support that open source system, right? So from this perspective, it makes sense to buy it as a service, because there is a different company, or there could be a different company that is running thousands of such installations, has pretty good automation, and has pretty good SLAs, or available SLAs, on whatever you're doing. So if you want to start fast, and if you do not want to, invest a mountain of money at the beginning, right, then you can procure a service from someone to manage that thing for you, right? So the expected scope of work, right? So what I wanted to tell, what do you need to do in order to create a product and based on open source for those different types of products, right? And you will probably see some similarities in here, right? So going from open source distro, first of all, we need to invest into stabilization. We need to invest into support services. And we probably need to invest to provide integration with organizations' supply chains, right? If we want to sell that product based on open source in our organization or using our organization, we want to probably use our supply chain, right? And all the commercial agreements and so on, then we probably have to repackage it as well, right? But stabilization of that open source code, maybe some additional testing, that is pretty much important. Now, when we go to the second type of products, right? So this software enabler component, MariaDB thing, the situation looks pretty similar. We have again stabilization of that open source component, and we need to assure that we have support services that go at least to the level of our product SLA, right? So if our product SLA is 24/7, right? It really doesn't make sense to have an open source software component that has an SLA of 8/5, so business days only, right? Because we are not really able to support our whole entire product, right? Now with open source ecosystem platform, again, we have to stabilize this open source platform, assure support, and on top of it, we need to integrate as well our own applications that would be running in such ecosystem, right? So this is something that we should do probably somewhere at the beginning when we try to offer such a product, to make sure that we have some usable use cases, that we reach the so-called MVP, minimum viable product, right? Definition with our product. And finally, in the open source as a service, again, we stabilize this open source software, and we probably spend more time on the DevOps things, like creating procedures allowing us to run this open source system as a commercial product, means that we can maintain it, that we can upgrade it, and so on, right? And what is pretty important, we have to make sure that we will be able to charge our customers for using that service, right? So we have to, first of all, build a pricing model, and then we have to build a charging system that would be able to enforce that pricing model, right? That could be interesting thing to do. Then we have this potential investment areas, right? They will map more or less to the previous slide that I have shown. So the scope of work related to creating such a product, right? But so maybe I will not go through all of those things, but maybe I will show you the difference or some specifics, right? And especially for the distro products, maybe it makes sense to make sure that we would be providing as well probably some services on top of it, like training services. And maybe here we would have to invest not only in our capabilities to maintain and develop this product, right? But we would have to invest some money as well in environments where we can run this product, and maybe some kind of training program preparation, right? Like the necessary materials, the necessary scripts and stuff like that. Scripts meaning like the exercises that can be executed with that product, right? And mostly we have here integration teams. Mostly we have here as well some investment into supply chain, right? To define the product items, stuff like that, right? So this is something that we should take into consideration on top of this standard work or standard approach, where we have development teams that are able to support our products, right, to the SLA that we agree. And then some upsell scenarios, right? So it's not only that we offer this product, right, but it can open some additional revenue streams, right? So open source distribution product. So if we try to sell something like this, then we can be sure that some customers will come with questions about functional enhancements, about services, about some additional software sales, right? And that means that this open source component might be missing a module that we can provide, I mean, our proprietary software, or it might require an external service that we can provide, right? So this is how we can make some revenue on this open source distro, right? With this own software enable component, here again, we have integration services that we can sell, right? Because we said there is a lot of ready-made integrations, but someone actually has to fill in that FQDN or IP address somewhere, right? So there is as well an opportunity to provide some additional services, right? with open ecosystem platform, as I have said, we have some applications that we provide, right? But we can as well work with partners that they can provide their applications, right? And this is as well a possibility to resell something, right? To work with a partner, to have some kind of commission on the stuff that they do, right? This is as well something that we can do, right? And finally, the open source as a service. All right, as I said, it's maybe similar to the open source distro, where, as I said before, we might have some additional services that our open source based product needs to extend its functionality or to use external services that could be an additional upsell scenario, right? And a little bit on these services, I haven't been speaking much about it, right? But there is as well a bunch of services that we can provide on top of open source software, coming from the integration, customization of it, consulting around open source software, and finally training. And this training services is something that we've been doing on the open source product that we are working on for like more or less a year, right? So you can provide a training on open source that you do not develop yourself, right? With some caveat that I will tell in a second about, right? So services for open source, what is the scope? So we have to educate the teams to be able to work on that product, to be able to explain its capabilities. In case of integration and consulting services, we probably need to have some ecosystem know-how. So it's not only that product, but an ecosystem where this product exists. So similar systems, integrations to other systems, and so on, right? Why a customer should be interested to invest into services for open source? Well, some integrations could be difficult without the know-how that you have. Sometimes the documentation is working in a way, okay, the code is the documentation, so actually you need to be a developer to do something, and it happens pretty often, I have to tell. And then, if you are a customer for an open source software, right, and we are providing a service, it might be that our presence in the open source community gives our customer an impression and actually a real impact on how the software is executed, right? So we are working with a customer on a feature that he would like to use in his environment, right? But working on it in open source allows us to impact the scope of that open source solution that we have, right? And of course, I could say that if we are selling some services to our customers, that usually leads to a possibility to sell other services, right? So if you use training or if you provide training to someone, then most probably that person, when he or she will have something to do in his company and his environment, he would probably go back to us, because we are the first source of information, right? And we learned something, we teach something to this person, so he or she, we are like naturally the first point of contact, right? So, and then it is as well an opportunity to provide additional services like consulting or maybe some additional products, right? So this is more or less how it could look like in this environment. All of those things bundled together, coming from stable product based on open source on the right, then software product that uses open source software on the left. All of this might be running in the open source based ecosystem platform, right? And it could be bundled as well with some service products that build as a service type of the product, right? Like software as a service type of the product. But there are a few questions, right? And this is actually the best practice that we learned from our experience with working with open source. So if you want to offer services, right, can they be delivered on unstable software? So how do you execute a training on something that doesn't work, right? Or can you build a software product based on something which you cannot impact? So what happens if you need a new feature within that open source product that you will reuse in your commercial product, right? Or can you offer a solution on a platform which you cannot control? So how can we guarantee the SLA of a solution to our customers if we cannot control the platform component, right? These are all valid questions, right? And we face some of them. So just to show you usually there is some dependency, right? And in the bottom of that slide, you see something that I called open source distribution, at least internal. This is something that you will need to either build those software products or to build services based on open source, right? So if you do not have a stable base open source distribution, even internal, it's very difficult to guarantee the SLA that you provide with your products, or even worse, services, right? It's very difficult to keep continuity of your product or service offerings, right? It might be as well difficult to convince your partners, right, to be a part of your ecosystem platform that you are building, or the ecosystem that you are building, right? If you cannot assure its stability, if you cannot assure new features, if you cannot assure that this platform would be seen by your final customers, right, as something worth to invest. So if you're working with open source, remember that there is a couple of products that you can build on it. You can build service products as well, not only software products, but as well service products. But whenever you decide to do something like this, make sure that you are able to build at least an internal stable distribution of your open source system, that you can keep the continuity of your products and that you can keep the SLAs of your products. So that would be it. Just wondering if we have any questions here. Oh, there are some questions. So maybe I try to read and try to answer. Okay, mentioned monetization schemes seem to be misaligned with the interests of the clients and create incentives to overcomplicate the software to justify the support, training, and consulting. Well, it depends what type of company you are working on, or how do you want to position yourself, right? Or there is a continuation. Is it a good idea to build a product on such foundation? Is there a way to mitigate this? Probably whether there's a good idea to build a product. Well, I think that it could be a good idea, especially in the areas where we do not have standards, and we are building some kind of de facto standards, right? If we are able to support this, either support by ourselves that software product itself, or to find a partner that will provide us the support for this product, we can build on top of it, right? And I can tell you, as a company, we have some engagements with some of the customers where we are really using open source as a platform of communication, right? And the platform of like co-creation for co-creation projects. And later on, some of those co-creation projects might become commercial products that will be available. And that will be sold not only to those customers that started, but as well to the customers that that would be interested in something like this, right? Okay. Is there anything else?
Any other questions? All right, I think that's it, Damian. Then thank you very much for the presentation, and stay tuned for the end of the session when we'll come back. If you have any other question, guys, please remember to post them in the comment section. And that moves us to the last but not least presentation of the day. That is going to be done or held by two presenters this time. We'll have guys from Ocado Technology, both named Paweł. One of them have been already a presenter on one of the Productizing Wrocław before, Paweł Stobiecki, where he talked about his hobby or something that he does outside the job, meaning creating board games, and how does that relate to making products. Today he brings his colleague Paweł Guśpiel, who is a product manager in Ocado, and they both will share the story of user-driven approach to building products that they have encountered over the last 2 years. Guys, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this final talk of this meetup. Thanks for taking part in it, and thanks, Mateusz, for inviting us. As Mateusz said, my name is Paweł Stobiecki, and the other guy, hopefully smiling at you from the stream, is Paweł Guśpiel. In this talk, we will be talking about a life full of surprises. The core of this talk will be a story of two products, great products, but which shattered our beliefs on the reality to ashes on the way. We will obviously mention also the tools that we used on the way, and some conclusions from those stories. But before we start, a couple of facts on us. Mateusz gave us a great introduction already, but let's reiterate. Both of us, both me and Paweł, have some experience in the software development space and in the PM space. Paweł spent like half of his life in the forest. I spent like 4 or so of the last years building board games as in my spare time. And we both work in Ocado Technology, a serial disruptor in the online grocery market and a great company to work with. In this talk, we will try and convince you why this statement is a trap. As PMs, we are kind of expected to know what we are doing, especially that others rely on that knowledge in their work, in their planning, and in their development efforts. But there are two challenges here. The first one is encapsulated in the "I believe I know it" statement. I believe I know it. So do you actually? Do you know? So have you checked it? Is it based on facts, or do you believe it? Is it just gut feeling? And it's really easy to treat your own beliefs as knowledge, especially that when you're doing it, it's really hard to detect. It's hard to notice that it comes in a surprising way. And due to this, you can find yourself in a situation like this when trying to take your next decision, you're wondering how you could actually identify if the path that you're taking doesn't lead to a dead end. So that's one challenge. The other one is related to how we work on our products. Mostly, we have teams, or we are part of teams and work on products together. The teams work best when they believe in what they are doing, whatever they are doing, and it's, well, we better be in the same boat about it, because otherwise we can find ourselves in this situation. I believe most of you know what I mean here. This can have a variety of shapes, from endless discussions and endless why questions to totally missing the point of a product and leaving our users dissatisfied. In general, whatever you do, the buy-in of your team is a key factor to success. Now that we know what the challenges are, let's have a look at how they could be tackled. Let's go back to our story. Me and Paweł work together in a department of Ocado Technology, which builds products for internal use, so for other Ocado Technology employees. You could say we are insiders, so we are in the perhaps best position possible to know what our users' needs are, what they loathe, what they want to achieve, and so on. Well, you'd be surprised. It doesn't always come out that way. And to be honest, reality has shocked us not once and not twice, up to a point where we actually started designing the reality around us to shock us, or we started to create experiments for the reality to shock us in the time span where we would like it to, instead of being surprised. Some of the tools that you can see on this slide, the design sprint, the user testing, or releasing when you still have something to be ashamed of in terms of what you're releasing, are some of the tools that we used on the way. Since we only have 20 minutes for this talk, we won't be digging into the details, especially that they might ring a bell in most of you. Instead, we would like to show you two stories of great products, but whose development came with even greater surprises. On to the first case then. Some 2 years ago, we were co-developing a data processing application. We already had some expert teams on board, but we wanted to broaden the range of this product, so increase the the internal penetration. For this, we knew that we would need to make a revamp of the UI, but we weren't quite sure in which direction exactly that revamp should go. So what we did, we made a design sprint. We took 8 people, some of which were representatives of our major current and future user groups. We locked them up in a room, not literally, of course, for 5 days. And around day 3, we had our conclusion. But what did the reality do?
It punched us in the face. All our discussions, what is intuitive and what's not, all quarrels was nothing more than wasting the time. The reality was not about designing the right UI. The users didn't want to have UI at all.
This lesson taught us that the reality can be shocking and it can be difficult to accept. But we acted on this one. So we continued the design sprint, and by day 5, we had a mockup. But it wasn't a mockup of a graphical user interface. It was Java code. Specifically, it was a thin mockup, a thin layer with nothing working underneath except for logs that only looked right. And we put that to a user test to validate the UI, the interface.
And it proved exactly the right solution. We proved the Java library was a good approach. And later, the time showed that we were right.
And we scored bonus points in this operation. When you do user tests, you have the facilitator, the user, and observers. In our case, most of the observers were our actual development team. So they were able to see with their very eyes the reaction of our users to the promise of the new product. Later on, they never had any doubts in terms of whether this direction was correct. Imagine how many whys we avoided in this way. Fast forward 3 months later. We are actively working on the new tool, and we are shaping the data asset APIs. A little side note at this point. In Ocado, we have a process where when you define a data asset or data object, you need to review its schema with members of 3 different teams. All of these 3 people are non-technical, due to which the developers are forced to follow a not very developer-friendly process in which they need to copy the schema that they developed somewhere else into a tool that those non-technical people are able to use, have the review, and then apply changes in the original code base. And well, we were actually developing a new representation for this for these data asset schemas. So we thought, why don't we make the interface in such a way that non-technical users could actually read it and review it? If this succeeded, we would be able to turn this unfriendly process to a code review, and both sides would be happy. So what we did was create, again, a thin mockup in Java of this API, specifically tuned to the needs of non-technical users, and put that to a user test.
And it was total disaster. Regret that you haven't seen the reaction of developers and our own, as we looked at how very intuitive and simple solution in hand of the users turns into totally unusable.
And guess what? We never came back to this idea. We saw such proof that we couldn't debate with. So we probably saved a month of development and a lot of frustration. 2 more months later, we finally had something working. It was a totally basic version, ultimate happy path with metaphorical no ifs in the code. So there was still much room for improvement, but still, we decided that we would release it. When you think of it, we had nothing to lose. The worst that could happen is that no one adopts the solution. And the best that could happen is that we have early users and a lot of early feedback. Plus, we have validated the basic concept of our implementation, not just the mockup, but the actual code.
The user tests help us to find the early adopters very quickly. And early adopters means feedback from the beginning, and later good user examples that convince to use our application.
So this was a great success. Sometime later, we are at a point when we have a couple of teams already on board. Now we are looking to freeze the API, especially the data asset representation, so that teams that adopt further versions of our products don't have a breaking change at every version. But trouble came in. Other priorities came in. Our capacity for the project was reduced, and we still needed to progress quickly and gather feedback quickly. So what we did was collect some volunteers from around our department, from other teams that weren't as pushed as we were, and we formed something we call the feature squad. It was to last 3 weekly iterations, and it was to deliver the final data asset representation in that time. We made one change in terms of the process, though. We substituted the demos for these weekly iterations with user tests. Of course, reality came in a couple of more times, killing off some features at mockup stage, including a very promising data asset search API that turned out to be nothing more than a duplicate functionality from IntelliJ IDEA, which our developers used as an environment for coding. But finally, after those 3 weeks, we did some decision tree gardening, clipping off the uncertain branches and getting a super useful minimum. Plus, we got what we wanted, so we had the data asset representation frozen at the end of this, and verified that it was what the users needed. Finally, after a bit more than 1 year after the design sprint has finished, we were able to celebrate our 1.0 release. It was an expected success. The product we made did just one thing for these people, but it did it extremely well. Another year later, around now, we can say that the project stood the test of time. It is widely used within the company and almost totally rooted out the previous solution that was used in its place. And what is more, it blazed the way for other products in our department that could be developed in a similar fashion.
I have heard that in a car racing, to confirm the new speed record, you have to beat it once, and then beat it once again within 1 hour to confirm your success. Similar is in product management process. It is not enough to do something once to prove that it's useful. Design sprint and user tests are already in our toolbox. Let's try to repeat together the whole process in another team. Let me define a new problem. To get an access to the data you need, you have to send an email to the governance team and wait a week or 2 weeks. Long time, isn't it? And by the way, you never know if your request will not be rejected because some of required information was missing. The reason for this is simple. The governance team is too small to process all the requests. It was not possible to change the headcount in a governance team, but we had already an idea of the system that will help to automate their work. Idea that just waits in our minds to be implemented. But wait, let's use the design sprint. Let's use it to teach our team how it can be useful, to get a buy-in for the new solution, and because it's very fancy.
And then the reality came in, and guess what it did? The original problem never existed in the first place. You know why? Because the governance team actually never processed any requests. Upon discovering this, however, we unleashed a larger hole in our process.
The governance team was acting only as a proxy. Eliminating them from the process was the right solution. As a part of the design sprint, we have prepared mock-ups and user tested it successfully. At the first stage, to address the biggest pain points, we had to focus on two areas: request standardization and request progress transparency. We were very, very excited to develop what we have just discovered.
Hold on, wait, said the reality. Literally, wait. 3 to 4 months until the solution is complete. And obviously, the users would be wasting their time all that time along.
So we had a number of discussions how to address the problem quicker. In one of the discussions, I put the constraint and asked the developers how to solve the problem in 1 week time. In response, one of the team members made a joke. Let's use a spreadsheet and Google Forms in place of Java. Remember, it's not a good idea to make that kind of jokes when the PM is near. Of course, we tried this approach.
The joke didn't just become the reality. It became an astonishing success.
The development of the final version from the beginning was influenced by a user feedback received from that Google Forms application. And what is even more important in that case is that in the first 2 weeks of development, we have solved the biggest pain points of the users. We are now a few steps forward in the application development. In the meantime, for example, we get rid of the spreadsheets or Google Forms. However, 1 week approach and user tests are still with us. Exactly yesterday, we had one. In the last minutes, we have shown you a few examples of what we did. We have shown you our way from the we believe we know to the place where we know because we checked. And what is more important, we have proved that it really works.
But wait, my case
now you know
different. My case is different. I work in an organization that limits me. This is not possible where I work. I don't have access to users. I'm overwhelmed by the goals and KPIs and all that stuff. These great ideas can be applied possibly in many companies, but sadly mine is different.
I will tell you a secret. We were thinking the same, but it's not true. All the walls we are building in our heads. At the beginning of the presentation, you can find a toolbox that we have used. So the first step is already behind you. Time to do the next one. As the Morpheus said to Neo in Matrix, this is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends, wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in the wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Tomorrow, you will return to the reality. Remember, it depends only on you if this will be the reality of yesterday or reality of tomorrow. Good luck. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks again.
I know what we're all gonna watch on Netflix after this is finished. Yeah, definitely. I'm coming back to Matrix Day. We have one question from Staszek. Actually, let me show that on the screen and read that aloud. So, shameless. It's about shameless releases. It requires for sure a lot of courage, but it saves a lot of work. But the question is, in all your experience, were there any unhappy users getting back to you and complaining after you've done a shameless release?
Well, to be honest, in case of this one, the Java orchestration app tool one, the users had the option to opt out of using this tool and just get back to their to whatever they used previously. So that was totally safe, no risks. Paweł, what was the case about the spreadsheets?
In case of the spreadsheets, we solved so big problem with transparency for the users that they were happy that they had spreadsheets, anything which solved their problem a bit. So we didn't have any problems with this.
Just one remark, it doesn't answer your question directly, but actually with such a shameless release, you may find yourself in the trap of your own success. So so many users might want to use your early product that you may come out of support capacity at some point, and this is also something that happened to my team some time ago for another service.
Okay, thank you for that. Let me bring other presenters to the stream as well. By the way, you brought some good memories for me, and I think I can recommend a talk of the man who invented design sprint, Jeff Knapp. I was there in one of the conferences in Mind the Product in London in 2017. And I think you can watch Jeff's keynote from that conference on Mind the Product page. So I highly recommend to do it. Jeff brings a story about design sprint, for example, for the hotel robots that you can for sure see in some Asian and American hotels. I think that might be useful in those times. Okay, so looking at the comments again, I don't see any new comments, guys, so I will give you still a couple of minutes for you from the YouTube to ask your comments. Please remember to put them in the comment sections so we will be able to see that. Maybe one question from my side first goes to Damian about the open source licenses. So is it that you can do anything that you want with such open source product or software, or are there any limitations, are there any differences whatsoever with the license?
Yes, they are, because there is a number of licensing schemes or license types, right, that you might see. Some of them allow you to reuse the code and do whatever you want with the code. Some of them, they allow you just to use a pre-built system based on that code that you can use it, but you cannot modify it yourself, and so on, right? So before you make any product decisions, that is definitely something that you would have to check whether you are like legally eligible to do what you want to do, right? So just make sure that remember there is a number of different licenses. They have different terms, right? They allow you to do different things. It might have an implication on the packaging of your applications or your products, right? And maybe you wouldn't be like legally able to do what you want to do. So check on that.
Okay, cool. Great. And maybe another question to Paweł and to Paweł. So as I understood correctly, in your case, you have the users of your prototypes, let's call them like this, or your stories internally in your company. In case there are some people listening to us here today or in the future that do not have this opportunity to actually have the users of what they do at hand, what should they do? Is there anything that you recommend for those type of people?
Well, the advice I would give is to follow the product development approach, and to quote, it would be getting out of the building. Ocado actually does that in terms of some kinds of users. We invite people to our company to be to just take part in user tests. So that's definitely doable. Paweł, do you have any other recommendations?
There are, for example, applications like Full Story, for example, which can do some kind of the recording of the session of the user. So later, this kind of the sending the events each time when the user do some action on your web page. So that's how you can track what the user are doing on your page.
Yeah, obviously those events are then drawn onto a kind of a user interface that you provide. So you are able to actually see with your own eyes that the user does a certain thing. It's not
so it's captured
like it's not like Google Analytics where you have to reinterpret everything that the machine captures for you.
Okay, and I think with that, be brave and talk to your users early on. We can finish today's event. Thank you very much to the presenters. Thank you very much for all of you that were with us during this 1 hour and a half. And till the next time, please be sure to check our Facebook page, Product Tank Poland, and mind the product page for another events like this coming soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.